The train does not stop here. It has never stopped here. It passes through, or around, at operating speed, without acknowledging what this place once believed it was. And that belief, in the middle decades of the 19th century, was the belief that defined whether a city grew or died. 15 cities made a decision. Some of them made it formally, through petitions and parliamentary opposition. Some made it violently, with torn-up track and rifle shots fired at passing engines in the Oklahoma night. Some made it quietly, through the reasonable objections of men of education and standing who believed, with genuine conviction, that the locomotive was a danger to their way of life. Every one of them was wrong, not because they were foolish. Most were not. The University of Oxford's senior men were among the most educated people in England. The landowners of Northampton, who forced Robert Stephenson to reroute the London and Birmingham Railway in 1833, were not ignorant. The provost of Eton College, who wrote in 1833 that no public good whatever could possibly come from such an undertaking, was not describing fiction. He was describing his institution's genuinely held belief about what steam locomotions would do to the character and conduct of young men. They were wrong about the railway, and the railway proved it, not by argument, by what happened to the towns it reached, and what happened to the towns it didn't. Before we continue, if this kind of railway history matters to you, consider subscribing to the channel. Every video here is built around the locomotives and railway systems, but there's the standard histories overlooked. The machines that outperformed their celebrated counterparts, the engineering decisions that were ahead of their time, and the railway lines that shaped nations without receiving the recognition they deserved. If that is the kind of documentary worth watching to you, the subscribe button is how you tell us, and we want to hear from you. Did you work on the railways, as a driver, a fireman, a fitter, a signalman, a track engineer? Did a parent or grandparent spend their career on a railway that is no longer operating, on a locomotive class that is no longer preserved, or in a workshop that is no longer standing? Leave it in the comments. The people who actually operated these machines know things that do not appear in any published railway history. We want to hear from them. Now, back to the locomotive, and back to the towns that tried to stop it. The year is 1833. Isambard Kingdom Brunel has just been appointed engineer of the Great Western Railway. The plan is clear. A main line from London Paddington to Bristol Temple Meads, crossing the Thames Valley and the rolling downland of Berkshire and Wiltshire. It is by any engineering standard a rational route. Brunel chose it for gradient, geometry, and operational efficiency. The line would be built to 7-foot broad gauge. It would carry freight and passengers faster and more cheaply than any road or canal that preceded it. What Brunel had not fully accounted for was the humans in the way. The provost of Eton College wrote to Parliament in August 1833. His letter stated plainly that no public good whatever could possibly come from such an undertaking. He was not referring to the engineering. He was referring to what the railway would bring with it. London, he argued, would pour forth the most abandoned of its inhabitants to descend upon the college by rail. Worse, the boys themselves would use the short interval of their play hours to travel up to the capital and return before their absence could be detected. Exposed, in the meantime, to what the provost described as all the dissipation of London life. In February 1834, Eton College took formal action. It opposed the GWR's application before Parliament. The college insisted on conditions. No station within 3 miles of the college buildings, a full fence on both sides of the line, and railway police. Funded by the GWR, stationed permanently to prevent Eton boys from reaching the track. The GWR largely complied. The station at Slough was placed at a respectful distance. A Windsor branch line, which might have served the college more directly, was delayed for 14 years by Eton's continuing opposition. Meanwhile, Oxford. The GWR's original prospectus included a branch from the main line at Didcot into Oxford, a logical connection to one of England's largest and most commercially active cities. Bills were presented to Parliament in 1837, and again, they failed. The university's objection was simpler than Eton's, but no less determined. Oxford undergraduates, connected by rail to London, would have ready access to improper marriages and other illegitimate connections. The branch was blocked. The city was left to be served by stagecoach from the railway at Steventon, 10 miles away, until 1844, when Parliament finally passed the Oxford Railway Act and the branch opened. Even then, conditions were attached. University officials could patrol the station. The GWR was permitted to sell undergraduates tickets only to approved destinations. Ascot and Henley were specifically prohibited. Northampton tells a different version of the same story, Sully. Robert Stevenson was appointed engineer of the London and Birmingham Railway in 1833. The natural route from London northward ran through or very close to Northampton, a well-established county town with an existing commercial base. Connecting it to London by rail would have been operationally straightforward. The landowners of Northampton refused. Hostility to the railway, from those who owned the land the track would need to cross, was sufficient to force Stevenson to reroute the line entirely. The London and Birmingham Railway, when it opened on the 17th of September 1838, passed the county town of Northampton at a distance of several miles. The engineering consequence was the Kilsby Tunnel, 2,400 yards in length, driven through difficult ground that caused Stevenson severe problems. It was one of the most challenging civil engineering operations of the early railway era. It need not have existed. But Northampton's landowners had decided that the railway was not welcome, and Stevenson had to go around. Northampton would not get direct service on the main line for decades. The economic cost of that decision fell not on the landowners who had made it, but on the town's merchants, manufacturers, and working population, who spent those decades watching traffic pass them by. In England, the resistance was largely polite. Petitions, parliamentary bills, conditions extracted from railway companies before the line received royal assent. The landowners and institutions who opposed the railways did so through the mechanisms of a society that had, at least in form, orderly processes for these things. Oklahoma in 1893 was not England in 1833. The Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad had built its line south from Caldwell, Kansas, into what was then Indian Territory, following the route of the Chisholm Trail. It had established stations where it chose to establish them, near Skeleton Ranch, near Round Pond Creek, and named them as it saw fit. The railroad had called one of these stations Enid. In September 1893, the United States Department of the Interior opened the Cherokee Outlet to settlement in one of the great land runs of the era. Settlers poured in. The department had designated county seats. Enid was one of them. But the location the department had chosen for the county seat of O County was not where the Rock Island station stood. It was several miles south. The railroad refused to stop its trains there. The trains ran through the government-designated town of Enid at speed, the locomotive exhaust beating hard, the carriages rattling through without pausing, the mail hook picking up pouches on the fly and strewing them along the track when they broke open. The Rock Island had its depot in what it called Enid, which the government called North Enid. The government's Enid had no service. For the remainder of 1893, the residents of both Enid and nearby Pond Creek, which faced the identical situation, pleaded with the railroad, with the territorial government, with Washington. The United States Senate sided with the railroad. By early 1894, the pleading had ended. Citizens began flagging down trains by any means available. Wagons were left on the tracks. Dummies were placed on the rails. On a night in early 1894, as a Rock Island train passed through Enid at speed, brakeman Billy Bowman heard a sharp report as the train crossed Broadway. When he examined his lantern afterwards, he found it had been shot. In June 1894, the people of Pond Creek tore up approximately 100 yards of mainline track and derailed a freight train. By July, bombs were being placed on the rails. The railroad, one of the most powerful corporate entities in the American West, was being waged war against by the inhabitants of two small Oklahoma towns because it would not stop its trains. The dispute was finally settled in August 1894, when legal action forced the Rock Island to build stations at both county seat locations. Even then, the railroad registered its contempt for the outcome. When the station at Pond Creek was finally built, The company hung a sign above the platform that read, "Not Pond Creek, but Round Pond." The principle at stake in Oklahoma was the same principle at stake in England 60 years earlier. The railroad did not serve the communities it passed through. The railroad served the railroad. And when a town decided it did not want the railway, or when the railway decided it did not want the town, what followed was not negotiation. It was power. The historian and railway writer David Brandon observed that when the railways began to spread across Britain in the 1830s and 1840s, most towns wanted to be connected, believing that an age of far greater prosperity would follow. Not to have a railway was thought to be the path to stagnation or decline. He was correct. The evidence was clear by the 1850s and unmistakable by the 1870s. Farringdon in Berkshire had desperately wanted to be placed on a railway. When the GWR built its main line from London to Swindon, Bath and Bristol, the railway passed Farringdon to the south without stopping. The town became the terminus of a short branch line in 1864, by which time its population was already in decline. It remained in decline through the end of the century. The branch did not save it. Kendal, Westmoreland, had believed itself important enough to warrant a main line connection. When the Lancaster and Carlisle Railway opened in 1846, Kendal found itself served instead by a 2-mile branch from Oxenholme, on the side of what became the West Coast Main Line, rather than upon it. The town that had expected direct access to the industrial heart of England became a railway backwater. What Kendal had wanted, and what it received, were not the same thing. These were towns that had wanted the railway and been denied, or had received it on terms that made it useful only to the railway, not to them. The case of Frome in Somerset adds a further dimension. Frome gained its station in 1850 on a secondary line from Bath to Weymouth. What it wanted was quick and direct access to London. That came in 1906 when the GWR opened its Taunton to Paddington cutoff via Westbury. For a time, Frome was on a main line. Then in 1921 the GWR built a short avoiding line to the south of the town. Express trains no longer stopped. Frome, which had struggled for decades to achieve railway access, found itself bypassed again. This time not because it had opposed the railway, but because the railway had re-engineered itself past it. In each of these cases, what governed the outcome was not the needs of the town. It was the operational and commercial logic of the railway company. That logic did not always overlap with the interests of the communities the railway ran through. Across the Atlantic, towns that found themselves off the rail network faced consequences that were not merely commercial but existential. The pattern in the American West was documented and repeated. A town with a railway connection grew. A town without one shrank and sometimes disappeared entirely. Populations shifted, sometimes physically, with whole communities uprooting and moving to be nearer to the tracks. The railway had made a promise to the 19th century. The promise was simple: wherever the track goes, wealth follows. What the promise did not say was, wherever the track does not go, decline follows instead. But it did, and the towns that had blocked the railway, or been blocked by it, learned that lesson too late to reverse it. There is a particular quality to the silence that follows a train that has not stopped. The residents of Enid heard it in 1893, standing on the dirt streets of their government-designated county seat, while the Rock Island trains thundered past at 40 miles an hour. The scholars of Oxford waited for a decade in the 1830s and 1840s, travelling home 10 miles by stagecoach to the railway at Steventon, while Brunel's locomotives ran between London and Bristol without offering them a platform. The people of Northampton watched the trains pass south of them on the London and Birmingham, on a route that Stephenson had been forced to deflect around their landowners' objections, through the darkness of a tunnel that need not have been dug. In each case, the decision had seemed reasonable to the people who made it. The provost of Eton College was not protecting ignorance, he was protecting an institution. The landowners of Northampton were protecting property and landscape. The Rock Island Railroad was protecting its charter, its operating economics, and its contempt for government interference. Even the University of Oxford's long resistance came from a genuine, if deeply mistaken, concern for the welfare of its students. The railway did not care about any of these things. The railway cared about gradient, curvature, tractive effort, revenue per mile, and the shortest path between two places that would pay to be connected. Everything else, institutions, traditions, landowners' preferences, the civic pride of county towns, was an obstacle to be worked around, or failing that, a force to be outlasted, because the railway did outlast them. The GWR built its Oxford branch in 1844. The London and Birmingham Railway opened without Northampton in 1838, and Northampton came to regret it for decades. Enid and Pond Creek got their stations in 1894, after a year of bombs and bullets, and the Rock Island hung its contemptuous sign and moved on. The 15 cities and towns documented here, Oxford, Eton, Northampton, Farringdon, Kendal, Frome, Abingdon, Enid, Pond Creek, and the others, did not stop the railway. They delayed it, they rerouted it, they extracted conditions from it. They shot at it, derailed it, and tore up its track. None of them stopped it. Because the locomotive, as an engineering fact, was more powerful than any argument that could be made against it. The economic record is clear. The towns that found themselves on the railway grew. The towns that found themselves off it, by their own choice or someone else's, learned what it meant to watch the future pass at speed without slowing down. If this is the kind of railway history you want to keep watching, subscribe to the channel. There are more locomotives, more railway systems, and more engineering achievements still to document. And if you have a connection to what you just watched, a family member who drove this class, worked in the workshops that maintained it, or operated on the railway that deployed it, tell us in the comments. What did they drive? Which railway? Which depot? Which line? The people who operated these machines are not in the standard histories, but the engineering record depends on what they remember. We want to hear from them. The train has left the station, whether the station was ready for it or not.